Go over the topic again. Yeah.
Morning. Thank you for joining us for this week's live Q&A. It's beginner beekeeping today, so no such thing as a silly question. The idea is you chime in, put your questions, Trace will read them out, and the idea is we're answering any questions that you might have when you're beginning in beekeeping. Sometimes out there you'll find that it's not the perfect place to ask those beginner questions. So what we want to provide here is a nice environment where everybody's friendly. We all started off as new beekeepers once. So chime in, whatever questions you have, and we'll try and answer those. We're also going to be harvesting a little bit of honey and doing a brood inspection. So stay tuned for all of that. I'm going to insert the key here now and turn it, which should start the honey flowing down through this frame and out the tube here. It's my father and I's invention that we worked for a decade on, and now we've had it out in the wild for 9 years, and we've got people all over the world. So let us know whereabouts you are tuning in from. It's really interesting to us to hear where you are, because we now have this amazing global community of people using flow hives all over the world. The honey's just starting to flow out. I'm going to taste that because I can't help it. Yum. It's a beautiful flavour coming in here. It's pretty much the spring as far as Apis mellifera is concerned. We don't really get a long cold winter like other climates, so the bees have been busy foraging here in this last month of winter, and we're starting to see the spoils coming into the hive. Look at that. If I take off this window, you'll see nectar glistening in those cells as well, showing that they are bringing in fresh nectar here. Such a beautiful sight to see that nectar flowing into the hive. This is our Flow Hive 2 Plus. This is one we didn't put any kind of finish on, and you can see it just goes this beautiful silver colour. With the Western Red Cedar Wood, it's something you can do, is just leave it natural, and it slowly turns this nice silver, but for a while it will be a little bit patchy. Look at that, the honey's pouring out. Beautiful. It's just mesmerising to just watch the honey pouring into the jar, and I never get sick of it, even though I've seen it thousands of times now. It's just a beautiful thing, and even though we're putting technology into the hive, somehow it feels more natural than harvesting in the conventional way. So the idea was with this invention is, can't we just tap the honey straight out of the hive without having to disturb the bees in a nice, easy, gentle way? And here it is. It works beautifully. So what we're going to do is cover this up, because we're going to wander away. We don't want the situation where bees are piling in the jar to get the honey. Sometimes they get hungry, sometimes they will actually go for the honey behind the hive, especially when they're a little bit hungry or somebody's left some honey out. So with a bit of wax wrap, or you can use kitchen wrap of any kind, we're just going to cover that, pinching it under the tube, making sure there's no gaps for bees to get in. And now we're going to wander down and do our brood inspection. Beginner beekeeping Q&A today, so put your questions in the comments below and we'll answer them as we go. So we're going to go down to this little hive down here in the garden. This is on the west side of our little office building, and there's some beautiful painted hives here. We're going to be inspecting this one by taking off the top box and getting right into the brood box below. So if you do have our Araucaria hive, it does need a good coat of paint, so why not get artistic with it? Isn't this just a beautiful design here? So first of all, protecting yourself from bees. If you're beginning in beekeeping, even if you're on the front side of the hive where the entrance is, get your bee suit on, get your veil on, and your gloves as well if you're new to beekeeping. After a while, you can take those gloves off and experiment with beekeeping without your gloves, but when you're new, wear your gloves as well. So we'll put the veil on, then we've got to go the 2 zips, left and right, like that, and one overlaps the other, and then a Velcro like that. Next, we're going to get our smoker and do a few good puffs in the front of the hive. Now see that? That's not really quite going yet. Keep puffing till you've got good bellows of smoke. There we go. That's starting to look better. And while you're at it, smoke your hands to mask your mammal smell, making sure the smoke's nice and cool. You don't want any flames coming out the end of your smoker. If there is flames, then pack a lot more mulch or whatever you're using for fuel in there to make sure there's no flames coming out. 3 good puffs in the entrance like that. I'm going to leave this smoker right in front so any returning foragers get a whiff of the smoke as they come home, and that'll put them into a nice calm mood. So next we're going to take off the gabled roof and put that aside. So let's see if that will pop off. There we go. And we'll put that over here. Then we have a choice. We can leave the inner cover on because the bees have sealed it on. And now we're going to separate these 2 boxes using our J tool and the chisel end of that. And what we do is we get down to each corner here and we are chiseling in like that and giving it a bit of a lift. Now that's coming up quite easily. Sometimes it's quite sticky, but today it looks like it's going to come up nice and easy like that. This is our Flow Hive Classic, the original one we launched with, and it doesn't have the pest management tray below, but otherwise it's still got a lot of the great features for starting out in beekeeping. Take the rear door off and that makes a great handle. That's something people sometimes miss. They're like, how do you pick this thing up? Because you want to pick it up so the weight is closer to you. If you pick it up this way, you've got a lot of weight out from your body. You want to keep the weight in because it can be heavy. If it's too heavy for you, take some of the frames out first. But I'm just going to grab here and there and lean back with it, keeping it close to me, and upend it like that in the garden so that you're not squashing any of these bees below. And you're keeping the frames in their plane so nectar isn't spilling out. Let's find a stable spot for that. There we go. Now here, when we pull the excluder up, this is the grid that makes sure the queen's not getting up and laying any eggs in your flow frames. So we're going to lift that just by slowly, gently peeling it like this, bearing in mind there could be a queen on the underside. So what we're going to do is have a quick check for the queen. So I can't see her there, but just in case I've missed her, I'm going to keep it pretty close to the hive, leaning up against it so that if she was there, she could just walk back into the hive. Now it's time to add a little more smoke, just like this, to help calm the bees. Now you'll notice that when I add the smoke, the pitch will change. The bees will start really buzzing, but then they'll settle down again. So if I put my mic a bit closer, let's see if you can hear that. Gives a thumbs up if you can hear that tone change. So what you want to do is wait for that then to calm again before we start pulling frames out. Now this is a good time to be starting to inspect your frames because here we are coming into spring and we want to make sure that our bees are happy and healthy and start to do our spring management, which means making space in the brood nest. Now this hive doesn't need it yet because the numbers aren't really building up yet, but pretty soon a lot of our hives will be really building up in numbers as the queen starts laying more eggs in response to a whole lot of nectar being available. So the egg laying will change and ramp up as the spring flow comes on, and that's when you're going to need to make more space for the queen to lay eggs. Otherwise your hive might swarm and half your bees might head off to find another home. Ideally, you keep them in the box, and that way you get more production, and it's just better beekeeping practice to manage swarms so you get less of them, and that way you're not bothering your neighbours with swarms flying off and taking up residence in their yard and so on. Okay, next we're going to take out a frame, but first of all let's just set up our frame rest. So these little harvesting shelf brackets double as a frame rest. So you take out one of the screws just a little bit over the top, just like you do when you're connecting them on to your shelf bracket. That gives us a spot to rest some frames. Now, if I want to pull a frame out, I want to choose one that's easier to get out first. I can see here there's no burr comb joining between the frames, so I'm going to go for this one here. But first, what I'll do is make a little bit more space and crack the propolis between these end bars, which you can do with your J tool like this, or like this, doesn't really matter, and that way you won't pull the nails out holding your frame together. Then using the J, going under the end and gently up like that. Same on the other end. And you can get your hands in there, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping, and you are slowly, gently pulling that first frame up. The first one's the hardest. I'm seeing what I want to be seeing already, and that's brood. So see here, we've got a whole lot of baby bees going through their metamorphosis underneath this brown capping. And they will emerge into the hive as young bees ready to start work in the hive. Here we've got drones with their big eyes that touch in the middle, a lot bigger. When people are new to beekeeping, they often confuse drones for the queen, but pretty soon you'll get your eye in. Queens have the same eyes as a worker bee because they start off with identical genetics, but through epigenetics they get a longer abdomen and bigger legs and everything they need to lay a couple of thousand eggs a day. As long as they're fed royal jelly for their entire gestation, a worker bee will turn into a queen. Okay, that's great to see. Nice brood. On the other side we've got grubs down the cells. Let me know if you can see those white glistening larvae there, and that's the stage before the metamorphosis. It's like the caterpillar stage of a butterfly, and they'll spin a silk cocoon around themselves. The bees will help them cap that off. Then they'll go through their transformation to grow their wings and eyes and all they need to be a worker bee. Very cool. So we're just having a look, making sure these are happy and healthy. We don't really need to take out any comb yet. We could if we wanted to, but I don't think we will today. Any questions coming in? Beginner beekeeping today, don't be shy, ask those silly questions you might be afraid to ask.
Great, so some great questions coming in. A couple on the queen, and in fact Matthew, he's just completed a hive inspection and found that the hive is actually queenless, but has lots of, like nearly 3 frames full of drone brood cells, but has also found a couple of queen cells that have not yet hatched. Just wondering what he should do.
Perfect. So it sounds like your hive has gone queenless, but they're requeening themselves. So that's the ideal situation, where if your hive loses its queen, they sort it out themselves. They will turn one of the cells that has an egg in the bottom. When that hatches out of the egg, they'll feed that young larvae royal jelly for its entire 11-ish days, and they'll pinch that cell outwards and down like a peanut shape, and then it'll be a queen. So all you need to do is put the hive back together and wait for the queens to emerge. Then they'll go on a mating flight, So check in another 3 weeks or so whether you've got larvae in the cells or eggs down the cells and some brood starting to form on your frames, worker brood that is. So it's possible that the queen got old, ran out of fertilised eggs and started to lay a lot of drones, and they bumped her off and they're raising a new one. But they would have to be, she would have had to have some fertilised eggs left in order to create a queen. So looks like you're in luck there. If it's unsuccessful and you don't get a mated queen in your hive, if the bees don't get that together, you can introduce a frame from another hive that has eggs on it and they can give them another go, or you could buy in a queen. And if all that fails, the last resort is to merge that colony with another hive, if you have one. Okay. Adding a little smoke, you can hear the tone change again if I get down here. So we can let that settle down and pull out another frame and see what's going on. Keep the questions coming in.
Seeds, people love the queen, of course. We've got some people on TikTok saying, of course, they want to see the queen, and we always want to see the queen, so hopefully we might spot her today. But also asking questions on where do you get your first queen, and if you just put your hive in the backyard, will it attract the bees?
Okay. So, if you want to attract bees to your hive, the recipe is put your hive 6 to 12 feet off the ground, just the brood box. Make sure there's not too much light getting in. You might need to switch out the core flute slider for something solid or put some black tape on the bottom of it, just so there's not too much light getting into the box. And then if you want to increase the chances, you could put some lemongrass oil in there or a product called Swarm Commander. And then hopefully in springtime you might find some bees will just move in. But a lot more reliable way to get bees is to take a split off somebody else, or a bee breeder can do that for you and install what's called a nucleus hive, where they've taken some of the frames out of another hive and given them to you, and they'll often supply a queen with that as well. So you can then you basically have a going little hive ready to roll, and get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, transfer them to your bottom box here, look after them, and they'll grow from there. So that's the easiest way to get going. You can order queens in the mail, but of course a queen isn't enough to get a hive going. You would be ordering queens to replace another queen, but if you want to get a beehive started, you'll need what's called a nucleus colony or a package of bees, which is like an artificial swarm. Or take a split from a friend who's got a lot of bees in their box. To get bees off something, a short sharp shake like this gets the bees off the excluder. Now I can put that aside. Now you want to see the queen. I'll have to focus on looking for her, but basically what you need to do is go through all of the frames and you're looking for her movement. And a tip when you are looking for a queen is, as you pull out one frame, have a little look at the next frame along. So let's do that now. I'm starting towards the center where she's more likely to be. You can then get a good look at the frame you're pulling out, and there's one for the movement of the queen. She's got bigger strides, and let's see if we can find her. So here we go, so I'm bringing that out now, and I'm looking at the next frame in. Just checking that one as well, because that increases the area you're surveying for a queen. I'm not seeing her movement there, so now I'll look at this frame here. I can see brood on there, so she could be around here somewhere. Keep the questions coming in.
Hey Seda, if you've got a number of full flow frames, Amanda's wanting to know, should you just limit how many you harvest at once?
I think it's nicer to harvest 2 or 3 at once and leave the rest for the bees. the way it's less disturbance for them. If you do have any spills inside the hive, it quarantines it to a smaller amount and a manageable amount for the bees to clean up quite quickly. But you can go ahead and harvest them all if you want to. We certainly have done that a lot as well. Okay.
Right now, Isabella's just saying maybe they can't hear me. I'm not sure, but hopefully I'm getting the thumbs up from everyone else. So let me know if you can't actually hear me, and I might need to go and stand next to Cedar. Just wondering, Mario wants to know from Melbourne, can I remove half the bees and make a second hive?
Yes, it's called a split. So as your bees build up, that's the best way to manage swarm control, or you do your spring management. Take half the frames out of this, put them in another box, and as long as there's eggs on those frames, they can raise their own queen, or you could introduce a new queen from a queen breeder, which would give you some known genetics. And if you want calm bees, order new queens. Otherwise, you take a bit of a gamble. It depends what's around in your area in terms of DNA from the drones that might mate with your queen. Okay, so I've got a couple of frames out now, which is nice, and I can easily just go sideways with my hive tool like this and then up. So it's the first frame that's hardest to get out, the rest are quite easy. Here we have some drones. We've got some drone brood, we've got some honey stores on this frame. There's no reason really for me to find the queen. I can tell that there's worker brood, so there has to be a laying queen in here somewhere. But have a look at this. This is drone brood. See how that sticks out proud, like little humps. And they're the male bees. They will emerge as these big teddy bear shaped ones with eyes that touch in the middle. Their job is to spread the DNA around, so each day they'll take off and fly to a drone congregation area, waiting for a queen to fly by. And then it might be 30 or 60 drones that mate with the queen on the wing. And that's the DNA that she'll bring back, and that'll be the temperament of your hive, will be the queen herself's genetics mixed with all of the male drone bees that have congregated to mate with your queen. She'll only mate once or perhaps twice in the first week of her life, and then that'll be enough sperm for 6 years of laying. Okay. Keep the questions coming in.
Cedar, Josh wants to know, is there any specific minimum distance from a kid's play area whether they should put their flow hive?
So some people can have allergic reactions to bees like they do with peanuts, so it can be risky. You want to keep your hives away from areas where you get a lot of, I guess, people coming who you don't know. So there is no minimum distance, but basically I'm happy to keep bees really close to my house because I know the temperament, but I wouldn't put a quite aggressive hive right here close to the front door. So there's a little bit of beekeeping knowledge there as well, to keep nice gentle hives if they are in proximity of other people that might get stings from bees.
Of course, everyone's always asking, Cedar, why are they not stinging your hands?
So once you are more experienced in beekeeping, you'll start to notice when they might be starting to sting. So they will sting when they're in a protective mode, and the genetics will determine whether they're more likely to sting or not. Smoker helps calm them, but as you get more experienced in beekeeping, you can experiment with taking your gloves off. But the moment I notice them change and starting to give me warning stings, then I would put my gloves on. I don't particularly like getting lots of stings. Some people don't care, but if they're starting to sting a lot, I'll put my gloves on. Okay, so we've got 3 frames here to look through on this side and 2 on the other. I can go across sideways. The reason why I'm taking a mental note is I want to put these 3 frames back in that same position. So if I slide them across this way, I want to then put them back again. Now, here we've got a lot of brood, which is fantastic. And that's what they'll need as the spring comes on. What have we got on this side? We've got more brood in this lower corner there, and honey storage over here. Now, both of them are quite dark because there's been a lot of foot traffic over the top. If you see that, sometimes the honey's quite light in colour. In this case, it's quite dark. But if I just dig my hive tool in there, you'll see what the honey looks like. Nice light honey underneath, even though we have a dark capping. So it's been in there a while. The bees have been trekking back and forth and perhaps used old wax to cap them off as well.
So a couple of people asking, what are you, like doing an inspection like this, obviously before spring here in Australia, what other things are you actually looking for?
So have a look here, we've got the queen and she's marked with a dot. So this has been a queen from a queen breeder that we've introduced to the hive, and they'll often mark them. So you can see that mark on her back there. And there's a colour code. So she's white. If somebody could chime in and tell me what year she was introduced. It's a little riddle. Okay. So it's white, or perhaps it could be a yellow that's going white. She's got bigger legs, she's got a longer abdomen, she's just at the tip of the J end of the hive tool there. She's cruising around, she doesn't seem too fussed that her whole hive's pulled apart, and she's perhaps looking for a cell to lay in. She often doesn't have stripes on her abdomen, so that's another way you can tell. Larger legs, bigger strides, and that dot that's on her back is often just a shiny backplate if she hasn't been marked. And it's more shiny because the hairs will get worn off because she lives for years, whereas the other bees just live a short, perhaps 6 weeks or so. Or the drones might live for 6 months, and they retain their hairs on their thorax. So back to your question.
Oh, now I can't even remember which one I asked. I think you answered it, Cedar, but I'm going to ask another question now. Because, well, a couple of things. Dave is saying he's from up on the Gold Coast, and he just wanted to mention that he's had his flow hive for 1.5 years, loves it so much, and says they're getting so much honey that the girls are refilling the flow frames every 2 weeks. I am so jealous of that.
Wow, so the flow's really kicked in. So that's only 1.5 hours north of here, and we're not getting that flow yet. So each region is so specific, and whether you're 1 hour or 2 drives away, it'll often be really quite a different seasonality for your bees. So there you are, every 2 weeks they're filling them up again. That is fantastic and so exciting when that happens. Everything aligns, you've got a healthy colony, lots of bees in your box, and flowers bursting at the seams with nectar. The bees go and get it, you harvest all your frames, they fill them up again, harvest all the frames, they fill them up again, you end up with lots of jars of honey on the shelf. Very exciting. Thanks for sharing your stories. Let us know what the climate's like in your area if you've got bees, whether you've got conventional hives or whether you've got flow hives. Let us know what it's like where you are. Now I want to put this frame back in because the queen's on there and I want her to stay in the hive. She's snuck around the corner now. She's over here, just at the tip of the tool, and she's getting a bit camera shy. She's going to dive back around the corner, or perhaps, oh, she's reversing. Is she going to go down a cell for us? Hard to see, which is right in here. There she is. I've just picked her up
Oh,
just to show you what she looks like. And I'm going to put her right back in the hive to make sure she's in there. There she goes. She's going to disappear down here. So you don't need to find the queen. Somebody asked, what are we doing in here with this brood inspection? We're doing a spring brood inspection just to see what's going on in the hive. Make sure there's a laying queen, which we established straight away by the presence of brood. So we didn't need to find the queen, we just did it because somebody asked and we wanted to show off what the queen looks like. There are reasons you need to find the queen. Let's say you're doing a split and you want to introduce a new queen, then you'll need to find which box she's in, because you want to introduce the queen into the box without the queen. Or you might be requeening, which means you're taking away the old queen and a day later you introduce a new queen into the hive. Comes in a little cage, which I've actually got one in my pocket here. Your queen will come in a little cage like that, block of candy at the end, and the bees will chew away at that candy and should be released into the hive a day later. There's a few tricks for introducing a new queen, so I'll run over that now. So let's say you've got your brood frames all in the box like this. All your frames would be in, and you want to put this cage in such a way that if one of the attendant bees, because she is sent with 5 attendants or escort bees usually, and that's to feed her while she's in the male. Now, if one of them dies and you've got the cage up this way, it could block the exit and your queen may never make it out. So you want it up that way. But there's one more trick to it. So you want this up this way, but actually on a slight downward slope. So if you get a really hot day, the candy will melt and drip outwards. So on that angle, that way up is the best position for your queen cage. You'll be putting it down between the cells like this, being careful not to put it where there's a lot of honeycomb, because you don't want it squished with honey or dripping in. You want to find a patch that's fairly open, and you will be putting it like that, slight downward angle, and it's squeezed between the bars. The entrance is on the top side, and then you can put your hive back together. A day later or so, when the candy's all eaten, your new queen will emerge into the hive, and that'll give your bees time to get used to her new pheromone, and they're much less likely to bump her off. So if you are requeening, best of luck with it, and there's some tips for your queen cage.
great. Seeds, what happens to the hive in the wintertime?
So it depends where you are in the world. Here we keep it in the same configuration, a brood box and then a super on top all year round. We can do that here because as far as Apis mellifera, the European honeybee goes, we don't really get a winter because we're in a subtropical region. If you're in a place that has many months of long cold winters and snow, then it's really quite different. You'll be preparing your hive for the winter and letting it be, and letting the bees look after themselves during that cold time. So generally beekeepers don't inspect their hives in long, cold, snowy winters. What they'll do is make sure they've got enough food stores prior to winter, and perhaps rearrange the hive a little to assist their bees. So in those regions, at a minimum, you'll be taking out the excluder, so the queen can move up into the top box if the bees are all moving up together to keep warm and consume the honey in one of the upper boxes. You also might have more boxes for more honey storage, so it is common in those colder regions to have a second brood box or a second honey box, so there's more stores for your bees to survive a long, cold winter. And if there's no feed for them, there's no honey stores, you'll need to feed them prior to the winter so that they can survive through many months with no flowers. So really quite different to here in the subtropical regions where the bees can just keep foraging through the winter. Goes in dribs and drabs, but keeps them alive during the winter time. Pretty much unanimously everywhere in the world, springtime is where you get the most flowers producing nectar and the most honey stored. But you can get great flows at other times of year as well. Normally we get the paperbark flowering in the winter, but it didn't rain in these last part of the winter, so it didn't kick off the flowering in the paperbark. So this winter we didn't get any paperbark honey stored in the hive. So we missed out this time. It really depends on the season. Drought, fire, flood will all affect the honey crop you'll get, just like any farming.
Right. A beekeeper on Instagram's asking, why do I see so many bees clumping at the entrance of the hive at night? Maybe a few hundred.
Okay, so that's a great sign that you've got a lot of bees in your hive. And there's two reasons they will clump at the entrance. The main one is they need to move some bees out to get adequate ventilation. Imagine your hive is totally full of bees. They're trying to cool it down. They're trying to collect water, do evaporative cooling. It's very hot and they can't get the airflow going. So half the bees might move out of the hive and they could be all the way up the front of the hive, even to the roof in an extreme scenario, or hanging down off the landing board. So that's typical to allow ventilation when you've got a lot of bees in the hive. The other reason is they could be preparing to swarm, which is another overcrowding situation where there's a lot of bees and they'll actually, it's said that they'll hang down off the landing board more so than upwards on the hive, and they'll stay there for days preparing to swarm. So that's another reason you might see a lot of bees hanging down. Springtime, if you've got bees hanging off the landing board, get ahead of the curve, take a hive split to reduce congestion, and make sure there's fresh real estate, fresh frames for the bees to draw out fresh comb, and that will be the primary trigger for swarming. If there's nowhere to lay, the hive is likely to swarm. If there's plenty of new space, they're unlikely to swarm. So you can either take a split, it's my favourite method, or you can cut out some of the comb in the bottom box. Usually it's just honey on the edges. You could take some of that away, introduce new frames, or if you're using naturally drawn comb, you could cut some out and put the frame straight back in, which is one of the many reasons why I like to just keep it perfectly natural for the bees in the bottom box with just a wooden frame, no foundation.
Right. Cynthia's noticed that the brood in this brood box is really quite dark. She's just wondering, how often do you change your brood frames?
Great observation. So it's a good idea to cycle frames out, and in the springtime cut some of that comb out. So we could do that, and let's see whether there is any brood in this edge frame here. If there's no brood in it, it could be a great one to cycle out. And you can see it is quite a dark frame. It's not very well formed. There's very shallow cells there. There's a bit of nectar there. There's a little bit of pollen, and I'm going to have to shake this to get all the bees off before I can tell whether there's any brood on there. So short, sharp shake diagonally across the box so the bees fall in, just in case the queen is on there. You don't want to shake her outside the hive. Okay, so certainly no brood on that side, and there's no brood on this side either. So this is a great one just to cut the comb out and put it straight. So if we have a knife, I can show you how to do that. Trace is going to go and grab a knife and a plate, and we can enjoy some of that honeycomb and even some of the pollen here, which you can see in the cells. Seeing as this is old and dark and not very well formed, we might choose to cut that right out. There is some nice honeycomb up the top we can enjoy on a cheese platter too. And then this frame will go straight back in the centre when it's empty, and that will be fresh area for the bees to build comb and the queen to lay, and that will limit that primary swarming trigger of nowhere to lay. It's beautiful. Observations here. We have got bee bread here where they've collected pollen and they've put it into the cells with their heads, and they've topped it with their special sauce, and they're fermenting it into bee bread. That's their protein source. Up here we've got nectar, and it's not capped yet, so that's showing us that the spring here is kicking in and we have nectar flowing in. Now to get all the bees off, so I can show you how to do this, we're going to shake it again, And then we're going to use our brush, which is in our caddy here. And we are just going to brush the remaining bees off because we don't want to take them inside on our cheese platter. There we go. Brushing the bees all the way. Making sure they're all off. There we go. And it's best to walk away from the hive a little way, otherwise your bees will follow you or go right to where you're going to do this cutout. And once you get there, just brush again any straggler bees. We're just going to lay this right down on the board, and because it's naturally drawn comb, there is no wires, there's no foundation, and we can simply get a knife like this and cut down the sides. You can use your hive tool, but a nice sharp knife is easier. And then we're going to go right along the comb guide. You can see here, I'll just angle it so you can see, there's the comb guide there. And that just helps the bees center when they're drawing their natural comb. So what I'm going to do is simply go up against the guide and cut all the way along like that. And there you have it. Some beautiful honeycomb to take away. You might ditch this old bit down here, but up here it looks quite nice and enjoyable. You can see the cross section there of the honey. Yum yum. And I'm going to leave this comb up the top here. They will then follow suit with that and quite quickly draw out the comb again. So that can go straight back in the center. Great idea if you're not going to take a split. Take a couple of frames from the edge, cut the comb out and put it back in towards the center in the springtime to limit the swarming tendencies. And that's called spring management.
So would you suggest is a good type of flow hive to get for a starter for a single family looking for a bit of honey and some pollinators for the garden?
Okay, all of our flow hives are suitable for beginners. Half of our more than 100,000 beekeepers in the globe are brand new to beekeeping, and we've designed them with features that assist you to get started. If you can afford it, go for the Flow Hive 2 or Flow Hive 2 Plus because it's got extra features that make it just a bit easier to set up your hive and manage pests. So go ahead and get that one, or we do have the Flow Hive Classic still there for you and the hybrid if you have budget constraints. Now this is going in towards the center of the hive like this. So you cut the comb out, back in the center, and that's way you've got a natural cycle going of old comb heading out towards the edge and new comb forming in the center where your queen will be laying. I'm going to take out this little queen cage because there's actually no queen in it. So we don't want to leave that in there. Almost lost that down between the frames though. There we go. And now we're going to put the hive back together as we answer a few more of your questions. Beginner beekeeping today, so chime in. We're down in the garden with our Flow Hive Classic. So that is very suitable for beginners, as well as our Flow Hive 2 is also very suitable for beginners. One of the main things you get with the Flow Hive, apart from the extra bells and whistles we build in to help you look after your bees, is you no longer need all the conventional stuff for honey harvesting, which is your honey spinner, your dedicated shed or room in your house to extraction, your decapping line with your hot knife, your buckets, your sieves and all of the mess that goes along with it. It's all contained in your hive in one simple solution with a turnkey honey harvest. So that's why it's become so popular for beginners and experienced beekeepers alike. Now, let's put the hive back together just by putting our frames back in. Now, it's possible that I've lost track of where these go, so what I'm going to do is just pay special attention that we're not pressing comb against comb, because here where we are, we've got lots of the small hive beetles. If we press the comb against comb, the bees can't service that area. Hive beetles can take advantage, lay thousands of eggs, and you can get a big slimy hive beetle nest instead of a beehive if you're not careful. So as we put these frames back, we're just going to make sure there's space between them for the bees to service. They need at least a 4mm gap to get between the comb surfaces. Any more questions?
Yes, Hev and Chip want to know, is it okay to freeze the flow frames in the winter time?
Some beekeepers really like to store honey or pollen stores to freeze for brood frames, but you're asking about flow frames. So I'll keep going with my brood frame idea. You can freeze frames of honey or pollen to give back to your bees later, and the same thing goes for flow frames. If you do have a deep freeze and you want to take some half-filled flow frames off for the winter to reduce the size of your hive to make it more manageable for your bees in the winter time, the freezer is the absolute best way to store them. Put them in the freezer and then get them out again, put them back on again when the bees are ready, usually in the springtime. If you don't have that, you'll be harvesting the honey and perhaps washing the frames, leaving them to dry and putting them away in a tub in the dark for the duration of the winter, or for whatever time you need to keep them off the hive, and putting them back again. Here in the subtropics we leave them on all year round, so that really does depend on your climate. Okay, let's put this hive back together now by picking up the frames like this. We know the queen's already in there because we found her earlier and put her back in the hive. And we're just checking as we put that in that we're not going to press any comb against comb. This frame here is all but empty, so we can drop that one right in beside it without there being an issue. Great. Now I'm just going to have a quick look here before I press them close together. Have a look here. You can see right down in the cells. If I move this frame across, there's just enough room between them for the bees to get in and service. So I'm happy with that. If you can put them back in the same order, that's great, but if you can't, just be mindful of the bee space. There's another frame with a lot of brood on it. It's been used a lot for brood, so if that's out towards the edges, that's great, because we can cycle that out next time once all the brood is emerged. This one's got brood on it too. The comb's fairly flat though, so I'm not worried about pressing two comb faces together. So down it goes, nice and gentle. The last one will be the hardest to slide in and the slowest, because we don't want to roll the bees as we push this frame down. Use smoke to get the bees out of the way. It's a handy tool both for calming the bees and for moving the bees along when you need to work. There we go. Slowly, gently, making sure you're not squashing any bees. And there we go. The hive's back together. Last thing to do is to push them together into the center so the bee space is correct for them building comb. Any excess space needs to be on the edges. So that's coming in like that, and that's moving across. Tightening up the gap between all the end bars. And now we can go ahead, put our excluder back in place and our top box on.
Great. Cedar, Francesca wants to know, now that you've made that one empty frame, how many frames should you leave empty to try and prevent a swarm?
I'd do at least 2 in the springtime, more if you can, and that way there's the fresh comb for the queen to lay in. That will really help. You can also add more boxes, that will really help as well. You could add another brood box or another super, allowing more space. Harvesting the honey is a great idea as well, because you can get what's called honey bound, where you haven't harvested the honey from the top box, the bees are storing a lot of honey down below, and then there's nowhere to lay eggs. As soon as you harvest the honey out of your flow frames, they'll start moving honey up from the bottom, because they can, making new space for the queen to lay. That's another great thing to do for your spring management.
Right. Sav's tuning in, wants to sort of start a hive in a backyard bee, and there's a few people sort of tuning in on this one. Just wondering, they're in a zone where varroa mite has been detected. Do you think it's best to wait for total eradication before starting a hive?
Okay, so do check in. I'm not sure exactly where you are. There's some areas where they really got a lot of varroa that are being controlled, but generally the ship sailed with varroa in Australia, and it's going to slowly spread out, so you can go ahead and start your hive, knowing that if you have varroa in your area, you'll need to develop your management practices, which there's a lot of different options, and there's a big world of people that are used to varroa mites to help teach us what to do to limit those mite numbers from decimating colonies. Okay. Now I'm smoking because I want all the bees off the excluder before I put this top box back on. Okay. And there we go. Now the inner cover did drop right off the hive, so I'll pull that off for the moment. I can use my brush to help brush away any last bees as well. And you need to seize a moment while there's no bees around this room, and we put that back on the hive like that. Trying to line it up, sliding it into place and across like that, so it's all lined up as best you can. And then we're going to put our inner cover back on and put our hive back together. Same thing for the inner cover. You're making sure there's no bees you're going to squash. One thing you can do is go on at an angle and turn it into position so you're sweeping any bees that might be in the way out as the inner cover comes into place. Make sure there's no bees on the top here, otherwise they might get stuck inside the gabled roof when you put that on. We've got time for another couple of questions.
Oh, great. Cedar, could a hive survive with two queens in the same hive?
Yes, you will sometimes find more than one queen, but generally they just have one. And sometimes beekeepers will purposefully manipulate the hive and set it up for what's called a double queen hive or a multi-queen hive, in which case they might have a brood box down below, one excluder, a bunch of honey supers in the middle, another excluder, and a brood box on top. That way you're supercharging your hive with two queens laying. There's a bit of an argument whether you may as well just start a second hive beside it, but the advantage of having two queens in a hive is if one fails, you've still got the other one laying so your hive doesn't die out. Okay, a little bit of a tight fit this one. There we go. Roof's back on. Now we need to put on the rear door, and then we'll go back up and have a look and see if we've got any honey stores from the hive we harvested at the beginning. Brushing any bees away. Use your gloves if you need a beekeeping, not like I do. Chef brackets can come off the side to a handy little frame rest, and we have our hive back together. We've got time for another question.
Great. Cedar, William actually wants to know, could I add another brood box to build up their colony? I'm not sure where William is.
Absolutely, you can add another brood box, typically in colder climates, to add another brood box. Just notice the honeycomb here, do not leave honey outside for the bees. That will actually start a robbing frenzy. If the bees get a taste for honey instead of flowers, then they'll start stealing honey from other weak hives and potentially rob them to death. So make sure that goes inside, keep it away from the bees. But we'll be enjoying that comb later. Okay, so here's a little hive we started to harvest from. This hive's ahead of the others in terms of bringing in nectar. And let's see if we've got any honey here. We turned a key on a single flow frame and look at that jar of honey we've got. Absolutely gorgeous. We can take that back inside now and enjoy the spoils. And what we've also done is we have reduced some of the honey in the top box. Great thing to do in spring. The bees will then be able to move honey up from below, allowing new real estate for that queen to lay in. So, good idea to harvest some of that honey. I can take this off now. I've got a beautiful jar of honey. A tip when you go to close it, back to a 90, out, and then in the top slot. While you're packing up, leave it in that position. So that's put all the cells back into cell form position. If you can leave that for a minute or two, it's best, because if there's a lot of wax and propolis in the frame, it'll make sure all the parts get pushed down into position. If you just do a quick close like that and move on, you might find the cells bounce back up and then they're out of line, and that could cause issues downstream. So we can take out a cap here. I've left the cap down in the caddy, so for the purposes I'm going to steal one from the other frame. Do put your caps back in, otherwise a whole lot of ants will move in. And just the hot swap here, like that. If you're quick enough, you won't even spill any honey. And you've got this, which you can leave on the jar like that for the remaining to go in, or you could just enjoy tasting that. And there we have it, a beautiful jar of honey. Thanks for watching.
I might just throw it in though, Cedar. You were asking about the queen dot, and Amanda's tuned in and thinks it's either the dot on the queen is 2021 or 2022.
Great. So there's a code to queens. I don't generally mark them, but a lot of breeders will mark them, and that helps you know how old they are. So we're at least a couple of years old there with that queen. She's still going strong, which is fantastic. It's amazing how long a single bee can last, laying up to a couple of thousand eggs a day. So go Queen Mary. And we've got our beautiful honey jar. All we need to do is the final little pack up here. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next week. And if you do want a handhold with your beekeeping, we have an online course which gets rave reviews at thebeekeeper.org. We put a lot of effort into creating high quality video training material with experts from all over the world who made amazing content for that. It's free to try, and it's also an amazing fundraiser. And the idea is we're creating billions of blossoms for bees to forage on safely all around the world. And of course, in doing so, we create a lot of habitat for all other species as well. And habitat's certainly what we need more of. So have a look at thebeekeeper.org if you really enjoy online video training content, and we'll see you next time, same time, with a great show and tell. We've got an exciting spring ahead of us here to show you a lot of great things about beekeeping. Thanks for watching.